Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Newseum today. We're so excited to see you all here. I got to speak with some of you beforehand, which is great. My name is Jessie Hollis McCarthy, and I'm with Newseum Education. We're so happy you could join our first program here today, a question and answer with Beth Tinker. I'm going to click on because in addition to Mary Beth, who I have with me, I also have Lana Knott, the Executive Director of the Newseum Institute First Amendment Center. And I want to send a special thank you to the schools I have here today. I have North Broward Preparatory School, St. John's University. I also have Marco Island Charter Middle School and Central Dauphin East High School. And then for all of the teachers and students who are joining us through the live stream from across the country, we're so excited to have you here today. And I really want to give a special shout out to Beaver Local High School in Ohio, who voluntarily gave up their lunch break to be able to watch this live stream. So a special thank you to you. So we're going to jump right into the program today. What are we going to be going over? Well, we'll give you a short introduction to the First Amendment, and then I'm going to turn it over and we'll talk about what are some limits to the First Amendment. And we'll look into a very famous court case with the first-hand perspective on it about what it means to students. And then we're going to wrap it up and turn it over to you to ask us questions about the First Amendment and how it works for you and in schools and things you might want to know about. So, how many of you feel like you can name all 5 freedoms of the First Amendment off the top of your head? Raise your hand if you think you can do all 5 right off the top of your head. All right, we've got some confident souls, so don't worry, I'm not going to give you a pop quiz on it, I promise. But let's look at it. So, First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution gives everyone in America these 5 freedoms with which they can express themselves. And you see them on the screens here. They're highlighted in pink to stand out. And what we see is it gives us the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom to assemble, and the freedom to petition. So we have this right to believe what we want, express ourselves through speech and press, gather with people, and ask our government for changes. And we always have to think about the First Amendment in that it applies to the government. So when we see that very first line, Congress shall make no law, it means Congress and the states and government organizations won't limit these freedoms in public spaces. But I have to ask a question. Are there limits to the First Amendment? Lada, can I turn this over to you?
There are a few limits here and there. I think any freedom that we have as Americans is very important, but nothing is completely unlimited. So with the First Amendment, there's a few exceptions they carve out for free speech. First of all, if you use your speech to threaten someone's life, and truly threaten someone's life, not the usual, I'm just gonna kill my little brother for that, but like, if you actually mean it, that isn't protected by the First Amendment. If you use your speech to incite immediate violence, that's not protected. Those things are both still crimes. You also are not protected if you use your speech to say something false about someone that damages their reputation, or if you take someone else's writing or words and pass them off as your own. You're not going to go to jail for those things, but those are things that you can be sued for. So those are all things that, while free speech is protected and the government is usually not allowed to censor you or punish you for your speech, we've carved out a few things that we're like, no, I'm sorry, the protection doesn't apply there because allowing people to threaten other people's lives is harmful. So there are certain things that just aren't protected.
Excellent. So when we think about this, and we have to think about it, what does it mean for schools? And what I want to do is turn this over to someone who, when they were a student, used the First Amendment to advocate for changes that they want to see. And it culminates in the Supreme Court case you see here on the screen. So I am going to figuratively and literally turn this over to you, Beth Tinker, and let you take the helm.
Thank you. It's so good to be here at the Newseum with all of you and to all of you listening online as well. What a time it is for the First Amendment, for free speech, and for students. It's mighty times, as a student told me recently. Do you agree? Do you think so? Come on, let's hear it. Let's hear it for the mighty times. Mighty times. Just like the times I grew up. Mighty times are here again. So much going on, so many people speaking up and standing up and using the First Amendment to do that. Is the First Amendment for kids? Yes, yes it is. It is for kids. There are limitations to it, as Lada said, but there are limitations for adults as well. So I just hit this one? Okay, thank you. So I was growing up in Iowa, and I didn't know about the First Amendment. I didn't know about the First Amendment rights that I had. I just liked to go to slumber parties and celebrate birthdays. That's me on the right, and my little sister Hope. We were living pretty ordinary times in those mighty times, all going on at the same time. And one day we saw the most amazing children on TV. This is not them. Can I go back here by any chance?
I got it. There we go.
Is there a Birmingham in here?
Further ahead.
Further ahead? Okay, I'm going to show you some kids that oh yes, these children were just amazing. Well, I don't see them, but I'm going to come back. Just go back? Okay. There were kids in Birmingham, Alabama, in the Birmingham Children's Crusade. And that year, 1963, I saw them on the news on TV in Iowa with my sister. We were watching the news. It's really a story of journalism. So I'm glad we're at the Newseum. Those children were so amazing. They were standing up against segregation, standing up to the Ku Klux Klan. And Martin Luther King was in jail in Birmingham that year. Well, Birmingham was called Bombingham because the terrorists, the Ku Klux Klan, had bombed so many black churches there in Birmingham, Alabama. So the kids said, we will stand up and we will speak up. And they came marching out of their 16th Street Baptist church, that was their headquarters, singing songs like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And they were singing and marching as children have all through history. Well, there were some terrorists, yes, as I said, let me see if I can find that one. Yes, there they were. The Ku Klux Klan was ready for the kids and to punish the children on Sunday morning that year, 1963, September 15th. They put a bomb in their church, knowing that the kids would be in Sunday school. Almost 2,000 kids had participated in the Children's Crusade that year in Birmingham, and Martin Luther King had called it the turning point of the civil rights movement. That's the power of young people. And maybe that's why the Ku Klux Klan didn't like the little children, and maybe that's why they planted a bomb in their church on Sunday morning, September 15th. And sure enough, 4 little girls were killed. Their charred bodies were found in the stairwell of the church. Cynthia, Addie Mae, Carol, and Denise. They were about the same ages as my sisters and me growing up in Iowa. And I saw all this on the news. Someone came by a picnic that we were at after church because my dad was a Methodist preacher. And then we also got involved with the Quakers. And it was Sunday, we were at a picnic when someone came by to tell us how the Ku Klux Klan had punished the little kids who dared to stand up for democracy, who dared to stand up for love and for equality and all of those democratic ideals. I thought those kids were so amazing. Cynthia, Addie, Mae, Carol, and Denise. Of course, now there are memorials built to these children in Birmingham. There's an entire park dedicated to them, and they have their statues of the brave Birmingham kids. I think of them kind of like the Black Lives Matter children of 1963. And these kids weren't popular with some people, just like Black Lives Matter is not popular with some people, but that didn't stop them. They kept speaking up for what they believed in, for racial justice and equality and those democratic ideals that they believed in, just like Black Lives Matter keeps standing up right now. When the 4 little girls were killed, a man named James Baldwin, the writer, and a man named Bayard Rustin had an idea, and they wrote a letter, why don't we have memorial services all over the country for these girls? And that's exactly what happened. And here's the memorial service we had in Des Moines. Bill Eckhart is there. He's the father of Chris Eckhart, who would later be involved in our case, Tinker versus Des Moines. I had just turned 11 years old when this was all happening, and I thought those kids were so brave, but I knew I was nothing like them because I was very shy. And I didn't even like dogs. I was scared of dogs. When the dogs attacked the kids, I knew I wasn't going to be up there. But I thought those kids were so brave. And people wore black armbands there in Des Moines and around the country, just like this. It's a symbol of mourning, of being sad about something. The next year, well, the whole time was an amazing time for young people speaking up and standing up. 1964, the Mississippi Freedom Summer, when young people went from all over the United States to Mississippi to help register black voters. Why weren't they registering? Because of the reign of terror that the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Council was carrying out there. And so young people went from all over the country, 1964, 1965, Selma, the march, and now we also had the buildup of the Vietnam War. In 1965, that Christmas, now this is what we would see on the news day after day. And the famous broadcaster Walter Cronkite would say, the body count today in Vietnam is 8. Next day, body count today in Vietnam is 10, day after day. Us kids were already pretty sad about what had been going on in Birmingham and Mississippi, and now we were watching the Vietnam War. Day after day. We didn't know what to do about it, but some kids at the high school had an idea. What if we just wear black armbands to school, and this will be our symbol that we're sad about the war, and that we're supporting a Christmas truce that was being supported by Robert Kennedy. Senator Robert Kennedy had called for a Christmas truce. So us kids thought that would be a good idea. So we decided to wear black armbands to school. I was in 8th grade. It was 1965. I was 13 years old. And the older kids said, come on, Beth, you could do it too. That's what they called me, Beth. And I thought, I don't know, I'm kind of shy. I was thinking I'd rather go roller skating, and I don't want to get in trouble, especially when the principals heard about the plan and made a rule against armbands. And they said anyone wearing an armband in the Des Moines schools will be suspended. Kids don't need to be thinking about war. They should be thinking about math and science and social studies. But we said, how can we not think about it? It's going on. And the kids in our neighborhood, the boys, were being called off to war. And my older brother was getting to the age where he could be going off to war. And so we decided we would wear the black armbands to school, and I was very nervous and scared, and we tried to convince the principals and the school board to change their mind. That's me with my mother and my dad in back, and 2 other students. Chris Singer also was suspended. 5 of us were suspended for wearing armbands to school. They wouldn't change their mind, though, and so after I had been, well, when I got to school, I was so nervous and scared, and I had on my black armband, and Mr. Moberly sent me down to the office, and they told me, now, take off that armband, Mary Beth, because it's against the rules. So in a great stand of courage, I had on my armband, and I was so nervous and scared. I was at the office, and I looked around the office, and so I said, okay, and I took off the armband, and I took it off. And that's when I found out you only need a little bit of courage to make a difference. You don't have to be the most courageous person in the history of the world. It certainly wasn't me. Well, after we got suspended, 5 of us got suspended for wearing black armbands to school. And so now, people started sending hate mail. And some people threatened to bomb our house on Christmas Eve. And I didn't understand it because we were speaking up for peace at Christmas time. It didn't make any sense to me. And of course, some people said, oh, these kids, they don't know anything about Vietnam. They don't know what they're talking about. Just like people are saying now about the students in Florida and all over the country. Well, that's not true. Young people do know a lot of what you talk about. And we knew something about how we felt about Vietnam as well. Besides, most adults didn't know very much about Vietnam. They didn't know where it was. They didn't know the history of Vietnam. And so there's a group named the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And they've been standing up for the Bill of Rights for almost 100 years. And they said, that's not fair that these kids are being denied their First Amendment rights. They should have a right to express themselves in the public schools. They weren't doing anything to hurt anyone. They weren't threatening violence. And so the ACLU came and offered to help us. And they tried to go with us to change the mind of the school board and the principals, but they wouldn't change their mind. So they said, well, we're going to have to go over to the other branch of government. There are 3 branches, right? The legislative, which is like your public schools, because that's run by the legislative branch, the public schools. The legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And so all of those branches are supposed to follow the Constitution. The Constitution, very small but powerful. And the ACLU said that we don't think your schools are following the Constitution by saying that you can't wear those black armbands to school. And so they said, we're going to have to go over to the judicial branch and have them check it, which is what happened. So it went to court. Here's Chris Eckhart. He was also suspended, and there's his parents. That's him at the school board meeting. He was the third plaintiff. The three that went to court were me, my brother John, and Chris Eckhart. Here's my brother John and I at the appeals court level. What do you think happened? Do you think that we had lost at the district level, at the lower level? There's three levels: the district, the appeals level, and the Supreme Court. We had lost at the district level, and I thought, of course we're going to lose. No big important judge is going to say kids have rights. So we had already lost. So it was at the appeals level now. I think I was in 10th grade by now. What do you think happened? Who thinks that we lost at the appeals level? Yeah. Who thinks we won at the appeals level? Yeah, about half and half. Should I let them know? All right, let's see here. Did we win our case at the district level? No. Oh, darn. At the appeals level? No, we lost. Okay, so can I go back to that slide of the, let's see, how do I get back there? Let's go back to this one. Well, did you remember the one of me and my brother with the peace armbands? The picture? Yeah, that's us. I don't know why we're smiling since we had just lost. That's us at the appeals level. Well, maybe it's because of those nice little peace signs we decided to paint on our armbands. Originally, they were just black. So we lost at the appeals level, and then it went on. It was appealed to the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, yay, we won! It wasn't just a victory for us, though. It was a victory for all of you and for students all over the United States. Because the Supreme Court said in the ruling written by Abe Fortas, Justice Abe Fortas, said that neither students or teachers leave their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. And that sometimes students have something to teach their teachers. Do you think so, students? Yes, I knew you would. One of my favorite parts of the ruling is that students are persons under the Constitution. That's kind of nice, being a person. And with the rights and responsibilities of persons. The court said there are two things that students cannot do under the First Amendment. Number one, substantially disrupt school or impinge on the rights of others. There would be limits. And that was the two things, that the students do not lose their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door, but it must be a safe learning environment, and there cannot be substantial disruption, and students may not impinge on the rights of others. Are you going to take that now?
Sure.
Or whatever. We'll be back.
So what does this mean to students today? What is the ruling? What do these rules that came out of Tinker and Des Moines mean to the students today, or the students sitting in this room? Lotta?
Well, it was so important. Your case was just, it changed everything, because before that, nobody really thought that students had First Amendment rights in school, that they had the right to speak freely. So now, and this is something that a lot of people forget, a lot of, I think, school administrators sometimes forget, that yes, if you go to a public school students do have the right to express their point of view, to express their political opinions. So you can't substantially disrupt the school. So if you're doing something that basically interrupts like everybody else's education, then that's not allowed, and the school can punish you for that. But if you're doing like something, say, like wearing a black armband, which is not disruptive, which expresses a political point of view that maybe some people would disagree with, maybe the school administration would disagree with, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the right to do it. That doesn't mean that the school can stop you from doing it simply because they disagree with your opinion. So this case, this ruling basically is what allows students, what allows you guys to express your political point of view and to take action, even if it's not an action that your school necessarily agrees with.
I have a question. Mary Beth, you went to a public school, and I noticed you used the term public school as well. Why do you keep using public school, and what does that mean for students who are maybe in charter or private schools?
Well, the First Amendment protects you from government censorship or the government punishing you for your speech. And public schools are considered part of the government, which is kind of interesting, but that's why the First Amendment applies to them. Unfortunately, the First Amendment will not protect you from a private organization trying to censor your speech or setting rules about what you can say or what you can wear. So if you do go to a private school, then you don't necessarily have the same protections in school. Now, outside of school, you are still a person, so there are ways that you can express your political point of view and opinion. But within school, private schools can put more rules on what you can say and do.
And charter schools are public schools. So you are covered by the First Amendment in charter schools.
All right, I'm going to pass this back to
Okay,
you.
shall I continue the story? All right, so I grew up and I became a nurse and I started working with teenagers and children as a nurse, and I started seeing all these wonderful qualities that all of you have. And I started thinking that it's going to be really great when young people have their rights and use their voices to stand up and speak up about so many issues that affect our world today. And so many kids are speaking up and standing up, and it really has a big effect. I saw so many great qualities of young people: creativity, energy, and a quality that Albert Einstein said is even more important than knowledge, which is imagination. Have to imagine a better way of doing things before we can get there. And that's one thing that young people are so good at. And so I started traveling around the country and speaking with students. I left my hospital and I decided that it would be good for the health of young people if you could stand up and speak up for the things that affect your lives and have a voice. And I started meeting so many young people all over the country who are doing that. And actually, even there are so many young people around the world who are doing that, because this is an international human rights issue, the issue of the rights of children and teenagers. And I started meeting kids who are changing their town's laws so that they can vote now at age 16. There are 2 towns now in Maryland where students can vote: Greenbelt and Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I started meeting kids who were having campaigns, and I was so excited to go to Brazil and tell all of them about the 16-year-olds, some of them in the US, and they said, oh, our whole country already has it so that 16-year-olds can vote. I started learning so much about young people speaking up and standing up for yourselves. Yeah, do you like my van? Been traveling around, yeah. And well, here's some kids I met in Washington, D.C., where we are right now, where we do not have senators or representatives who have a vote in Congress. Over almost 700,000 people do not have representation to vote in Congress. And these kids are doing something about it. They want us to be the 51st state. And so they were down at the Senate at a hearing there about Washington, D.C. becoming the 51st state so that we would have senators and representatives to vote in Congress also. Here's some kids on Long Island whose French teacher was laid off, and they started a petition. Were they using the First Amendment, by the way, to do that? Yes, the right to petition. Here's some students I met down at the Supreme Court a couple of years ago. Now I like to go hang around at the Supreme Court. It's so much fun. There's always so much going on down there. And here's some students I met there who were standing up for immigration rights. Are they using their First Amendment rights? Yes. Here's some students in Arizona. They were speaking up for safer gun laws. And they had a walkout there last week when I was in Arizona speaking with students from Arizona. All over the state had come to speak about the things that they were speaking up and standing up about. And while I was in Florida, in the Tampa area, where's our students from Florida? Yeah, all right, okay. Yes, I'm so glad that students in Florida are speaking up for safer gun laws. I spent most of my career as a trauma nurse with teenagers, and I would be the one taking care of the kids that got shot and who were injured by guns. And so now I'm so glad that young people are speaking up for yourselves. And here's a student in Tampa who was doing that just last weekend when I was there. But one of my favorite stops on the Tinker tour was back at my old junior high school, Warren Harding Junior High School, where I went a couple of years ago to celebrate 50 years after being suspended. And the principal and the superintendent helped me plan a big celebration, and we went to 5 high schools and 5 elementary schools and back to my junior high school, and they even dedicated a locker to me and my brother. So that's me at Warren Harding Junior High School. Chris Eckhart, the other plaintiff in our case, passed away a few years ago, so he missed being there. But I'm so glad to be with all of you as we celebrate the First Amendment and young people who use it to make a better world. Thank you. Thank you.
So I know we moved through that very quickly because we want to make sure we have enough time to get questions from all of you, because that's why you're here today. If you want to dig deeper into this, if you want to read more on the case or the First Amendment, you can check out newseumed.org for additional resources to help you maybe dig into those questions you might have. But I want to open it up to ask a question. Now, this is how it will work. If you have any questions at all, raise your hand and a Newseum Ed staff member will call on you. We can only have 4 people lined up at our central microphone at a time, so don't worry if you aren't in the first round. We're going to try our best to get to everyone. Additionally, if you are watching via the live stream, you can also ask us questions. Just tweet to @NewseumEd with the hashtag My5Freedoms, and we have someone who is checking those tweets, and we'll try and read those in. Now, there are a lot of people watching in here, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to get to everyone, but we will try our best. And feel free to ask any questions you have for either Mary Beth or Lotta Knott, and or me, and we'll get those answered. But I pulled out one that I want to start it with, so while you're raising your hands and getting ready to ask your questions and getting lined up, I'd like to ask one that someone sent in advance. So, this is from Seth at Findlay High School in Ohio, and Seth asked, what were some struggles you faced in your court case? Why did you feel you needed to start the movement you did, and do you have any regrets?
The struggle that we faced mostly came from the haters, the crazy people who started sending us hate mail, and some of it is right here at the Newseum. Some people would send letters saying, why don't you go back to Russia and China where you'll have oodles of freedom? And I was thinking, what are they talking about? I'm from Atlantic, Iowa, where I was raised before we moved to Des Moines, Iowa. And some people like that, you know, they're still out there. They were sort of like the trolls of 1965, but I think that was the hardest thing, when people threw red paint at our house and called us communists just because we were speaking up for peace. My mom would say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. So we handled it with, you know, by just laughing at times and crying at times, and always remembering the sacrifice that other people before us had made. We always thought about the Birmingham kids and the other kids in the civil rights movement and people who had risked their lives and really stood up to make a difference, to make our democracy better.
And he asks, why also did you feel the need to start this, and did you have any regrets about this?
Why did I start it? I was just emotionally motivated, as the young people, I think, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas have been. There are strong emotions, and those strong emotions call for strong action. That's the motivation. We would watch on the news the children running from their burning huts in Vietnam and the soldiers lying on body bags, and these news reports that made us very sad and feel very emotional about all of this. That was our motivation. It's a natural drive for young people to express yourselves. Even babies express themselves. And so I think it's a natural drive.
All right, I want to turn to our first question in the house. So if you'll introduce yourself and then ask the question.
And excuse me, I also have signed armbands for all of you asking your questions.
Oh.
Yes.
All right. First and foremost, thank you ladies so much for putting this on. My name is Jessica Cartwright. I'm a teacher at Central Dauphin East High School, here with an array of students. My question is for Mary Beth. So as a teacher, I know the power that my students possess, but you, someone who actually lived it and went through it, what would you tell them to keep their motivation and their spirits up, especially with everything going on in our country?
What I've found is that when you find an issue that you care about, and I know so many of you already have issues that you care about, and you join up with other people who also care about that issue to do something about it, life becomes very interesting and meaningful, and you get to meet all kinds of great, interesting people. Like I'm meeting all of you today. And many days it's even fun, like today. So that is my advice. Find some issue that you can speak up about and stand up about. And also, even as a child, I felt sad about a lot of things, and I still do today. I think because I've been a nurse working with children and teenagers for so many years, many things make me sad. For one thing, that kids don't have what you need a lot of times. And so I found that it really helps me to take action and to do something about that. And it helps me to feel better. And I think that's helping the students in Florida and all over the country right now who are speaking up about the sadness that we all feel about the gun violence epidemic that is so out of control in our country right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Miguel Brandon. I go to CD East. That's my
Miguel.
teacher. Yeah, like I know you stated that in the beginning of the court case, like, I mean, not the court case, in the beginning when you wore the armband, like your school suspended you. But like when you got into the Supreme Court and everything, like, did your school like change their mind, or were they still against you? Like, how was your community with it too? Did they support you or were against you?
Yeah, originally the schools had suspended us, 5 students. There was North High School where my brother John got suspended, Roosevelt High School, and I was at Warren Harding Junior High School. It was 1965. And so then we weren't sure what to do, but the ACLU, they came in and said that we think that that's not fair. What has happened to you? And so we're going to try to help you change that. And they did help. And that's why it went to court. We wanted to try to work it out without court. And I always advise students, if you have a disagreement with your school or someone at your school, try to work it out without court. And it's much better, which we did try to do. But then it went to court, and so that's how we ended up at the Supreme Court. Eventually, the school did completely come around and change. Even when the school board voted against us originally, it was 4-3. So 3 school board members had said that we should be allowed to wear our armbands. So there's always a difference of opinion about all of these things. But the year that we won, Roosevelt High School invited our lawyer, Dan Johnston, and he was an amazing young lawyer. They invited him to be the keynote speaker at graduation at Roosevelt High School. So I have to hand it to the Des Moines schools, and I've always enjoyed working with the Des Moines schools ever since. And actually, we're planning now a big anniversary of the Tinker ruling, which will be there in February of 2019.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take a question from Twitter, so we're going to turn it over to our virtual audience.
Okay. I have 3 questions here that I'm going to lump together because they're on the same thought. One is coming from Malik at Marble Hill School for International Studies in New York. I have Jacqueline asking a similar question from Bishop McNamara High School in Maryland, and Peyton from the Ursuline School in New York. And they are wanting you to compare students' rights today with how they have evolved either for the better or the worse since you were active. So do you feel like current educational system gives students more freedom to express their emotions and feelings today, or is it more of the same or worse than when you were in school?
Are students better or worse today as far as having your rights? It really depends a lot on the school where you are. I work with so many principals, and I was just with some in Arizona, that want their students to have rights and want students to use the First Amendment and speak up. And I was also a speaker at the National School Boards Association meeting a year ago with their school attorneys. And there are so many school board members and school attorneys and principals, administrators, vice principals, and I know some of you have people like that in your schools that really want you to use your rights and stand up and speak up for yourselves. And then, of course, there are some that aren't so comfortable with young people using your voices. But what I always say to administrators, because I speak often with administrators, I always encourage the administrators to have students have a say in your schools. And not just over little things like what color to decorate with at homecoming, but real decisions that have to do with curriculum and what goes on in your schools. Because when students have a voice, it's better for everyone in the school.
Lada, may I ask a question? Is there any important First Amendment developments or rulings that came between Tinker and now that influenced students' actions in schools?
Oh, yeah. And one thing that happened after the Tinker case was there was a Supreme Court decision in a case called Hazelwood, which said that if you write for a school-sponsored publication, like your school newspaper or the yearbook, then the school has a lot more control over what you can publish there. So that was not such a great thing for student speech, because basically it said that does anybody here write for their school newspaper? Oh, that's awesome. And unfortunately, when you write for your school newspaper, if your principal or vice principal says, no, that seems too controversial or that's too critical of the school, you can't publish it. Because of that Supreme Court ruling, they have the power to do that as long as they have some educational reason for it. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think that you can learn a lot as a student journalist by following the stories that you think are most crucial to your audience. But I will say that if your school newspaper won't allow you to publish it, you can still say put it on a website or print it out and distribute it, as long as you're not, again, substantially disrupting the school or invading the rights of your fellow students. You do still have the right to speak out and convey your message, but there is a lot more control when it comes to like something that the school is actually putting out, because it's thought of as the school's speech, not your speech.
And let me just add to that also that even with Hazelwood, it depends on what state you live in and what school you go to, because 13 states now, and Washington State was just the last one about a week or two ago. In those states, the legislatures have passed laws saying we are going to support our student journalists. We're not going to go by the Hazelwood decision. As long as the article is well written and as long as it does not substantially disrupt school or impinge on the rights of others, our students will have them. And you can check what states those are by going to the Student Press Law Center website. That's the Student Press Law Center, and they deal with student journalism rights.
All right, I'm going to turn to another question in the house. Hi.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm from North Broward Prep in Florida. And I have a question for Ms. Tinker. When you were suspended, how did you react and how did your parents react?
When I was suspended, how did I react? Thank you. I just happened to bring my suspension paper today. I'll show it to you. Yeah, I found this in a box when I was cleaning out the closet a few months ago. Always keep your suspension paper, people. And it says to Mr. and Mrs. Leonard Tinker, this is to inform you that Mary Beth has been suspended from school because she was wearing an armband, which the Board of Education ruled out at their meeting this week. And it's signed by Mrs. Tarman, the girls' advisor. But I was nervous and worried when I was suspended, and I didn't ever like to be in the spotlight. But over the years, I've learned that if I can help young people stand up and speak up, it's worth it. But at the time, I was very nervous and scared. I knew my mother would understand. I was a little more concerned about my dad because he had said, you know, I don't think you kids should necessarily wear those armbands because the principal has made a rule and it's not easy being a principal. But us kids, we knew something about our dad. This is where young people, you're so persuasive. And we knew that our dad had a soft spot for the conscience, because he had lived through World War II. And he always said that we need to stand up for our conscience and to stand up for what's right, because otherwise we could have the Nazis in charge. And so when our dad said that, we said, but Dad, it's our conscience. And then he came over to our side. So I was really lucky about that. But I was nervous and scared the whole time. Going to court, I was nervous. I was really worried about whether I was wearing the right kind of outfit for, you know, court and things like that. I mean, I was just worried about a lot of ordinary things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, another one from someone here. Hi.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Peters. I'm a sophomore at Central Dauphin East High School, and my question is for Ms. Tinker. If you could change one thing that you did, what would it be and why?
If I could change one thing about all of this, well, do I have to just pick one? There would be several. One thing I always thought was we should have taken more photos because we don't have a lot of photos of that period. But another thing, if I could add one more, I would probably try to be a little less clueless. I was so clueless about how important this case was going to be. I had no idea that it was going to be a big deal, a big landmark case. I mean, you'd think I would have got the idea because it was at the Supreme Court. But I was busy with, you know, I had just moved to a new school when we went to the Supreme Court, and I was really thinking about who I was going to be friends with in algebra and where I was going to have lunch and things like that. But
Thank you.
thank you.
And I'm going to take a question from our virtual audience. Hi.
Hi, we have several people on Twitter noticing the pin that you're wearing.
Yes, the pin.
If you could explain that, please.
Well, I am the luckiest person because I got to meet Sissy Marshall, who is Thurgood Marshall's wife. Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, who was so amazing and wonderful. And so his wife gave me a pin with his picture, Thurgood Marshall. And so I always wear this when I speak with students because I want you to know that Thurgood Marshall is here with us in spirit and that he wanted young people to have your rights and he wanted you to speak up and use your First Amendment rights to make a better world.
Hi, I'm Jordan from North Broward Prep in Florida, and I have a question for Ms. Tinker. A lot of schools have been planning walkouts in Florida, but I know that some public schools like West Boca High have been putting restrictions on them. How do you feel about that, and how do you feel about how it goes against our First Amendment?
That some students are planning walkouts this week. I know it's a very big week for student voices, but some schools are putting restrictions on them, you're saying, and how to deal with that. I've talked to so many principals that are encouraging students to work with them to have a walkout that works for everybody, where the principals can feel like it's safe and that the students also feel like they're expressing their message. But can you tell me the restrictions that you're dealing with there?
Well, West Boca, one day they all decided they were having 17 minutes of silence, and they all decided instead of doing that, they were going to walk to Douglas. But the next day, they locked all the gates and told them that it was wrong what they did and that they can't do it again. And because more schools kept on doing it, so they said that it was wrong and that they couldn't do it. So that's kind of the restrictions I was talking about.
The schools, after they had one walkout, then the schools locked the gates and wouldn't let them leave
That
the
school, and then
again?
other schools like Pinecrest and schools like that wouldn't let them leave.
And Pinecrest and things like that wouldn't let the students leave. What do you say about that? A lot of schools have a... And also, I think at some point we can talk a little bit about civil disobedience, because that's basically what we did by wearing our armbands. Sometimes, if there's a rule that you really, really believe is wrong morally, like, let's say, gun violence, if there's something you really believe, and number two, you do something peaceful. The action has to be peaceful. And number three, if you're willing to take the consequences. So some student might decide that, you know what, it's going to be, I really, really feel strongly about this gun violence issue, and my walking out is peaceful. And number three, I'm willing to take the consequences of being suspended. That's called civil disobedience. I didn't know about it when I wore the armband, but that's basically what we did also. Sometimes it's worth it to pay that price, but I'm not saying, you have to be the one to decide for yourselves.
And that's an incredibly good point, because with the school walkouts, there's a good chance that if your school forbids them and you do it anyways, there's a good chance that they would be able to punish you, and it wouldn't be against the First Amendment, because you could consider that to be substantially disruptive. But again, it's a decision that you make knowing that it would be possible for your school to punish you. If you're able to get your school and your school district to sort of sign on with your plan of action, that's the best, I think. If that's not possible, they can punish you, so it's something that you need to think about. I will say that if the school locks students in, that is actually usually a fire code violation. And if that's something that is happening, you should inform the appropriate authorities, because that's a shortcut to getting the students to do what you want them to do. I mean, it's possible that they can punish you for walking out, but they cannot seal you in. So just something to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Ashley Bergfield, and I'm a student at the University of Texas School of Law. And I had a question regarding, you talked a little bit about your experience as a high school student, but one of the things we've really seen is the difficulty at university campuses with balancing between having the free speech capabilities of debating and discussing, but also the hazards of having really high-profile individuals and maintaining security on those campuses. How do you think we can encourage a balance between allowing for free speech on campuses, but also ensuring that these debates and protests don't get out of hand?
Yes, it's a huge issue, free speech on college campuses, and the issue of hate speech, and how much should the schools be responsible for security, and how much do we weigh the First Amendment, your free speech rights, with the 14th Amendment, which is equal protection. And this is a legitimate debate that's going on in the country. I personally lean towards free speech and away from censorship. And I think that even with hate speech, you know, unless it's violent or threatening violence, as you said, that we have to be willing to tolerate some degree of speech that we don't approve of and that we don't agree with, and especially at college campuses. How are we going to, you know, what do you think about it?
I tend to lean the same way, and the fact that I think that allowing for a civil discourse to be able to consider various ideas is really healthy to have, especially like students here today, to be able to hear kind of how you went through it, various experiences, because I think that's how we're going to educate the masses more, is by having those kind of informed discussions. So I'd agree with that.
Yeah, a high school student came up to me recently after my talk, I think it was in Illinois, and said, you know, I liked your speech and everything, but could you please be sure to talk about love more? And so I said, well, yes, I will. And it really is about love and respect. Even the First Amendment is a guide for how we can deal with controversy and how we can deal with disagreement in our culture with respect, that we respect everyone's viewpoint and we respect not necessarily what they say. We don't agree with what they say necessarily, but we can respect them, and we respect all religions, and that's the wonderful thing about democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a question from our virtual audience.
Okay, here's the question to Lotta. If students have the freedom to wear this black armband, why are there particular dress codes and speech filters like that in place in public schools?
That's a really good question. So in some cases, so what you wear is a form of speech. And in the case of the black armbands, it was seen as a kind of speech. It's political speech that doesn't invade anybody else's rights or disrupt the school environment. And the interesting thing is there was another case that came along years later where a student wore a T-shirt to school that had an anti-gay slur on it. And that was not, and he was asked to take off the T-shirt. And in that case, it was not considered a valid exercise of his First Amendment rights, because even though it was a T-shirt, it had a message on it, it was seen as, since it was pretty offensive to any student who might identify as gay, or really anybody in general, it was seen as invading the rights of other students. So just because it's an article of clothing, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a non-disruptive or non-invasive form of speech. It really just depends case by case. That's kind of how the First Amendment works. You got to look at stuff in context, and each instance is different from every other instance. So you can't really have a blanket rule about clothing or any particular type of speech.
Courts have generally upheld school dress codes.
Excellent. All right, let's hear your question.
Hi, I'm Kyra. I'm from the Marco Island Charter Middle School with Mr. Jarrett. I have a question for Ms. Tinker. You said that you lost 2 of your court cases. So what kept you or inspired you to move on even though you had lost?
Since we lost at the district level and then we lost at the appeals level, how did we keep the strength or the motivation to keep going on? It was hard because of, well, for one thing, the haters do make life a little unpleasant, of course, but they are out there, but we find ways to ignore them, right? Yeah. But the worst thing was that the war kept going on and the war kept building up, and it was really awful, and so many people were going off to war from our area there where we lived in Des Moines. And so I think what kept me motivated was knowing young people through history who were standing up as well. I mean, even the Birmingham kids, the Little Rock Nine. I started learning about more kids in the civil rights movement, and I was like, well, if they can even risk their lives, then it's the least that we can do is to, go down and give this deposition and things like that. And also we knew that there was so much, misery going on in Vietnam and among the families of soldiers and things. So we always kind of compared it to that. It didn't seem so bad then.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hello, I'm Amber Wolfe from North Broward Prep in Florida.
Hi,
and my
Amber.
question is for Ms. Tinker. Why did you decide to become a nurse after all of the court cases?
Yeah, why did I decide to nurse? Well, to be a nurse, I liked doing practical things. If somebody fell over right now in this room, I would sort of know what to do. I kind of like that idea. So I really liked nursing, and I really liked being with kids and teenagers, and I don't know, it was just something, it sort of combines the practical skills, like you can start IVs and things like that, but also you can combine making a better world, like preventing kids from being shot in the first place, so they don't need an IV. So I like to focus on that part of nursing also, to help kids be healthy and strong so you don't need to end up in hospitals and emergency rooms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Elvin Perez, and I'm from Central Dauphin East High School. And so my school tomorrow, they're having a walkout for all the gun violence and stuff. Yeah. And I was just wondering if there's any advice you can give us to like get our protest going. Or
You're having a walkout tomorrow at your high school. What's your high school?
Central Dauphin East High School.
At Central High School in Florida.
No, it's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, you're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's right, that's right. So you have it planned, the walkout for tomorrow?
Yes.
That's great. What's your plan? What are you going to do so far?
So I think like around like students' lunches, we're gonna.
Oh, yeah, chime in there. We've got both of you. That's great.
So a group of us had a plan. We talked to our principal who approved it, and then we talked to our administration, and they're like, this is a great idea, so we got them involved. So a group of us came together with plans of security, what we wanted to, and what our message is, and it's for young people to speak up and ask for change.
That's so great. And what is your name?
Elisa Sahi.
Elisa, thank you both. That's so great. And so you're at East High School in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and you worked with your principals, and I mean with the administration and teachers, and so you have a plan. Are you going to leave at 10 a.m.? I think that's the time.
We actually have 3 students doing speeches, so we're going to go ahead and they're going to speak about mental health, gun reform, and the NRA. And then at 10 minutes, we're going to have our 17 minutes of silence.
Oh, that's great. So you have a whole program set up. You're going to give speeches about gun reform and school safety and the NRA. And then you're going to have some silence or something else in there?
Yeah.
To memorialize the ones who were killed. I think that's wonderful. That sounds like a good idea. Okay, everybody, come on. Let's hear it for the... that sounds like a good plan. So what are you, you're trying to just tell other students about it and get more students involved or something like that? And get the word around? That's great. Well, you have to write to me and let me know how it works out, okay? It's marybethtinker@gmail.com. Anyone is free to write me and I'll write you back.
Any other First Amendment thoughts we want to add? Audit anything?
That's fantastic, and I think that's exactly what you should be doing, exercising your rights, being well organized, raising awareness. It's fantastic.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Christian from St. John's University. You mentioned in Maryland how students now, some of them can vote at the age of 16.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that's a great idea, and I thought that was cool, but at what point does a student become an informed voter? So like, is it 13, like you made this case at 13, should we have kids voting at 13, or should we just keep it at 16? Is there a kind of a line that you think should be drawn?
You're asking about voting in Greenbelt, Maryland, and Tacoma Park, Maryland, and by the way, that's for local elections.
Right.
School board elections, local elections. They still can't vote for president and senator and things. But so where should the limit be for students voting? That is my question. Where do you think it should be? I mean, it's not like there's a specific, I sort of picked 16 because people around the world are focusing on that, and there are campaigns in various cities to change the voting age to 16, and it seems like from a developmental point, it's probably pretty reasonable. What do you think about it? I mean, it's not like there's a set answer to any of this.
I think that at a younger age, it makes sense that students should be involved, and providing them the right to do that, especially on a local level, will allow them to vote and know the value and the power of their voting from a younger age. I also think that if we were to do that, we also need to make sure we teach younger people the value of voting and how they should be voting. Like what's the goal and the purpose of voting? And I'm not sure all education systems at a younger age do that on a younger level. So.
Yes, I know. I agree with you. I think there should be more civics, and there should be more emphasis on teaching students, what voting is about and what the issues are about, and things like that too. But To be fair, a lot of adults don't know a lot of that as well, and they do have the right to vote regardless of where they're at in their own development or in their own knowledge of things going on. So that's why I think it's, fair to think about it. And we didn't always have the voting age at 18. That only got changed during the Vietnam War. It used to be 21. So I think it should just keep coming down a little bit more and include more young voices. Thank you. Like yours. How old are you?
I'm 18.
18. You could register right now.
My name is Zachary Niemark. I'm from North Broward Preparatory School in Florida.
Hi, Zach.
So, some of like the kids that are like really, really involved with it, like they don't have enough time for like social lives, and they probably like sometimes like lose friends. Did this happen to you? And like, what do you think about this? Like the kids going into it and like they're losing their friends.
And not having enough time. You're saying if you get involved in these issues, you may not have enough time for your social life, and you might even lose friends.
Like the ones that are going to like the interviews and all that stuff, and they have the stuff. What do you think about how like they're losing their friends? Because,
it's hard for. Pardon?
Because they have to like push them off for like the interviews. And did this happen to you?
Like kids have to get involved in these issues, like say gun violence, and then they get all involved, and they're trying to build up the number of kids, that are walking or whatever they're doing, and then they might lose their friends. They might not have as much time for their social life. So what can the kids do, and what about that? I mean, I think you have to balance. Everything in life is a balance, I think. I'm a nurse. I want you to be healthy and balanced. If you get stressed, I want you to take a little rest. Call a friend. Drink some juice. Do something that'll help you feel better. Take a little rest and do something you like that's fun, some hobby or something like that. I think we do have to have a balance, because if you just do, work on some issue that you care about, like gun violence all the time, you might, it might get too stressful. And I think those students, everybody, all of us have to find ways to balance. Are you finding ways to balance your life too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
I'm going to take one more question from the virtual audience.
Okay, this one comes from Findlay High School. After you ran into opposition to the armband, did you consider protesting in any other way? A different way?
Did we consider protesting in other ways after we ran into opposition on the armbands? Yes, and that's what I always tell students also. There's always some way that you can express your views. There were some students with the Providence Student Union in Rhode Island, and they got really tired of all the standardized testing all the time. So they dressed up like guinea pigs and rats, and they went to the state legislature. And that's how they expressed themselves. And they got in the news about that. And I think they stopped that graduation requirement for yet another test. But when we couldn't wear our black armbands back to school after Christmas, we wore all black clothes for the rest of the year. And we said, well, they can't tell us to take our clothes off. So you see, there's always a way. There's always a way to express yourselves.
All right, last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Emilia Tineo. I'm also an Ozanam Scholar at St. John's University. So this question is for Ladona. One of the first few slides, you spoke on the limitations of the First Amendment, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on the last one. It says the infringing of others' rights. Unfortunately, there are 964 hate groups across our country, according to the Southern Law Poverty Center research. And it worries me that our political culture extends these limitations to this hateful ideology. So I was wondering if you can give me more information on how our government defines infringement of others' human rights.
Absolutely. One thing that is something a lot of people don't know is that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, which, I'm not a huge fan of hate speech. I think it's a horrible thing. But the problem is that it's very hard for anyone to define what is hate speech and what isn't, and what is offensive and what isn't. And while I'm no fan of hate speech, I worry about the government or your school administration or anyone being the ones to draw that line, because it's really easy for that line to, when somebody else is basically deciding like, okay, so we're not going to allow anything that's offensive, it's really easy for that to encompass more and more things. And that's why, even though I think it is very troubling that we have such hateful dialogue and that there are so many active hate groups right now, but the problem with trying to ban them is that you end up banning a lot of other things as well, because there are campuses that have put in codes saying, well, we're not going to have any hateful groups. And then that same thing was used to shut down a pro-Palestinian group. It was used to shut down a chapter of Black Lives Matter. It was used to shut down a few other things too. So I think that because of that slippery slope, the best thing you can do when you're confronted with something hateful is the answer to that kind of speech is more speech, to speak out against it, to never forget that you also have First Amendment rights, and that sometimes it's the best thing to do, to sort of drown it out with the counter argument to that.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions, both those of you who are here and those of you who are watching virtually, and an especially huge thank you to both Lotta Knott and Mary Beth Tinker for joining us here today. If you want to continue this conversation, tonight Newseum Ed is having a special SS Chat, #SSChat, where we're going to be following up with this conversation and sharing some resources from both our site, newseumed.org, and others to help extend the conversation and give students a better grasp on their First Amendment rights. Thank you so much, everyone.